In this section, we will look at how to use a stopper to transition across the river. This might be to navigate a pair of gates such as a down to down or down to up, where one gate is situated above and at one end of the stopper and the second below and at the other. We'll identify the four most common approaches and their strengths and weaknesses. The technique an athlete chooses may in part be due to the shape and angle of the stopper, but in theory, if it's square across the river, the drop into it isn't too steep, it possesses a reasonable eddy on top and a curl on either end, then all four techniques should be possible. Although the four headings used maybe aren't universally recognised, they offer a good descriptor and help differentiate between the techniques. It isn't uncommon to observe a top athlete using a blend of these. This is a more technically challenging technique than the drop-in and trundle, but when done well is much quicker. It also still allows the athlete to drop onto the stopper onto a downstream blade, which for some is more reassuring, while the final two techniques for moving across stoppers require the use of the upstream blade. The ideal setting to practice this competence is by using a stopper that sits square across the river, the drop into it isn't too steep, it has a reasonable eddy on top and preferably a curl on either end. The further accurate positioning of two gates, one situated a few metres above one end of the stopper, with the second, an up or a down, situated a few metres below the opposite end, will create a more authentic setting and guide the boat's movement and path. The lead gate should be positioned so the athlete is forced to make the essential movement across the river. From a safety perspective, it is essential to know in advance that any stopper utilised for this type of practice can be exited before engaging with it. For a good execution, the athlete must firstly ensure through appropriate setup that the boat is moving in the desired direction, e.g. the path between the two gates, before connecting the bow with the end of the stopper. The amount of bow connection will then determine the degree of downstream swing of the tail, the resulting upstream angle of the boat, and crucially the athlete's body position relative to the stopper's eddy. If this connection is correct and the boat is kept flat throughout, the athlete will rise up onto the eddy and into a position to complete the cross. An appropriately timed upstream stroke can be used to guard against over-rotation if excessive swing on the tail occurs. If present, a curling diagonal wave into the stopper will significantly help in undertaking this manoeuvre. So now let's have another look at that in its entirety.